Truth or spin? Why are the media and the EFF clashing ahead of elections next year? And is the DA's moves against illegal migration xenophobic? The Politbureau is now in session. I'm Nicholas Bauer, connecting the dots for you on this Sunday. In the Politbureau today, EFF leader Julius Malema again threatened members of the media, and Minister of Women in the Presidency, Bathabile Dlamini, banned eNCA from a government event. The Politbureau discusses why the country's politicians are going up against the media so close to an election year. First, let's listen to this clip from Julius Malema a week ago.
Pravin Gordhan's daughter, since we started asking questions, that daughter is closing bank accounts now. That daughter is resigning as a director in those companies. These crooks who are calling themselves journalists are sitting with those questions. They've never asked Pravin. The deputy president of the EFF came here yesterday and spoke. Instead of repeating those questions, they asked Pravin, why is the EFF attacking you? I want the EFF leadership from today and the membership to know we're not answering any question from Tiso Black Stars, Daily Maverick, and Scorpios and ETV, which ask us about our wives, about our relatives, about anyone we know, until they ask Pravin these questions in a live interview.
Section 16 of the South African Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of expression and, as such, freedom of the media. But do journalists ever overstep the mark? Politicians and the press often find themselves in a symbiotic relationship, but who is using who? And can South Africa's top political names afford to alienate the media as South Africans prepare to go to the polls in 2019. To unpack this discussion, we were hoping the EFF would join the Politbureau, but alas, the Red Berets declined our invitation after showing some initial interest. Joining us, though, is senior columnist and reporter and former editor Ferial Haffajee, as well as on the line from Cape Town, we're joined by Adrian Basson, the South African National Editors Forum treasurer. Thank you so much for giving us some of your Sunday, Ferial. We'll start with you. Do our politicians have a point? Are South Africa's journalists picking sides, or perhaps have any bias against certain individuals or parties?
Thank you very much for having us here. May I say that I find it quite cowardly for the EFF to talk at and not to talk to use platforms to attack the media, but then to always shy away from discussing in dialogue and being able to answer for the very serious attacks they've been making on many journalists. I think that if you look at the statistics, if you look at the trust barometers around the world, the media has had a tough time. But in South Africa, in the past couple of years, because of the media's sterling work in being at the forefront of uncovering what we call state capture, in fact, trust levels have gone up. If you look at various sets of research from Media Tenor to Media Monitoring Africa, the media gives a fair shot to all the different political formations as well as to civil society. If you look at the coverage in particular of the EFF, you'll see that the statistics will reveal that they get far more coverage, and I'd argue sweetheart coverage, than any other political formation does. And they probably cross now because it's turned a little bit negative. Lots of investigative work showing that, one, they are merchants of disinformation, and two, facing very, very, very serious allegations of corruption for which they refuse to come and answer for.
Well, let's bring in Adrian on the line from Cape Town. Adrian, why has the relationship between the EFF and the media soured so? I mean, you've even written a column about the fact that it was fine for Julius Malema to call you brother on Twitter and give you all sorts of tip-offs, but that is patently not the case now.
No, hi, Nicholas and Ferrell. Look, I think Ferrell's correct that at the heart of the attacks on journalists is the corruption investigations against the EFF, and then specifically Floyd Shivambu, the deputy president, and Julius Malema, the leader. I actually had very severe deja vu this week and last week when these attacks and individualized attacks on journalists started to around 2011, 2012, when Cyril and I were working on City Press, and we started revealing the Limpopo tender corruption, at which the heart of Julius Malema and Castle Matale, the then Premier, was. And we actually uncovered the fact that Malema's family trust benefited from hundreds of millions of rands of government tenders. So, and at that time, we saw the same kind of really hateful comments on individual journalists. I think that EFF then changed a bit. They at least for the last year or two, they positioned themselves as constitutionalists. They championed the Nkandla case in the Constitutional Court that ultimately led to...
For that fact, I mean, could it be argued that the media was fine to work with the EFF when it was the goal of getting rid of Jacob Zuma or during Jacob Zuma's downfall, and now the EFF argues that the media is now turned their sights on them?
So I think let's just look at those two things separately. I think firstly, you are correct, and I've written that as much that I think we did give them the benefit of the doubt when they were attacking Jacob Zuma. We all saw the danger Zuma posed to our democracy. We saw with the scale of corruption he got away with. But what I also wrote is that we now realize the EFF was never anti-corruption; they were anti-Jacob Zuma corruption, and I think that's the mistake we made. Excuse me. We probably didn't go back enough to what happened in Limpopo and what was happening with VBS at the time when Jacob Zuma was still in power. I do think the EFF, as Cyril said, got sweetheart coverage. I think they are masterful at managing the media. I think of all the political parties, Julius Malema understands the media the best. He understands social media and sound bites. He speaks in headlines, which makes it easy for journalists. But then the dark side of that is obviously the intimidation. If a less experienced journalist see what can be done to more senior editors, that may have a chilling impact on the way we cover the EFF.
Adrian, I'm going to bring Ferial back into the conversation. Julius Malema has made it personal with some journalists. Does it help when journalists are returning fire? And not necessarily with you, but the case in point being Ranjeni Munusamy and Julius Malema throwing pot shots to each other on Twitter. I mean, is this the way to move forward?
Can I step back a bit and go back to that clip of Julius Malema where he accused the media of not taking seriously or asking questions related to Pravin Gordhan's daughter Anisha and her alleged corporate interests? Actually, some of us went straight to her and asked, what is this about? They immediately provided absolute clarity that she worked for Investec. When they take private equity stakes in companies, they place directors on those companies. The reason she resigned is because she actually left Investec to do social justice work like you yourself have gone and done. On the 33 questions, I was quite happy, and I am quite happy to sit and with the EFF go through how we've checked out every one of those. Each one of those questions is related to what I believe to be a malign campaign of disinformation that you put into the public ether and trust that nobody's actually going to do the work. We went and did that work. They won't sit down and talk about why they're placing disinformation into the public sphere, and very dangerous disinformation.
Another senior columnist and former editor, Max du Preez, wrote a column for News 24 where essentially it was interpreted as him asking for censorship of the EFF, saying they shouldn't be granted any more live coverage until robust fact-checking by journalists takes place in a live environment.
It's often quite easy to do live fact-checking. If you are watching a feed like that, if you've got people who know their stuff, they can paste, what do you call it, that thing that runs at the bottom? They could they could have put a truthometer, live truthometer. You could take those 33 questions and attempt to answer them. I completely disagree that somehow the media has created the EFF. Not at all. They're brilliant politicians. Neither do I think that if you mask them or gag them, that somehow the rising fascism will go away. Not at all. I think it must be aired, and in line with Section 16, there's absolutely no way we can be party to acts of censorship. What I do think we should consider as journalists is acts of solidarity. solidarity. So if you get banned, it's my duty to stand with you and say, I'm not going to be party to this. If eNCA is excluded, if anybody is excluded from the EFF's coverage so that they can only speak to the sweetheart journalists, then I think as a body of journalists we have to exercise acts of solidarity. That's not calling for censorship, though.
Just to remind our viewers, the EFF were invited to the Politbureau this morning after showing some initial interest in joining the conversation. They declined, saying that they have a Central Command meeting to attend to. Adrian, I'll bring you back in on the line. Adrian Basson, SANEF Treasurer, on the line with us from Cape Town. Is the answer and the way forward robust fact-checking? I mean, you've got SANEF asking for a meeting with the EFF to clarify these statements, these threats against journalists and calls for certain journalists to be targeted as they are part of a so-called Ramaphosa defense force. How does this square? How does SANEF move forward, especially so close to an election, if the EFF is not playing ball, won't even meet with you?
So, Nicholas, just a few points. I think, I support what Pharaoh has said about journalists standing in solidarity, and SANEF has actually now, the SANEF Council has resolved that we encourage journalists to act in solidarity when our colleagues are being insulted and intimidated on individual level. And let me just clarify. Journalists don't think that we are above criticism. In fact, if you dish out criticism, you have to expect criticism back, and that's fine. I love to engage in robust debate. What we are talking about is the individualization of specific journalists who write critically about the EFF from public platforms, and to use words like to deal decisively with them. So we encourage journalists to actually walk out of press conferences and leave rallies where individual journalists are being intimidated. And I also don't think that's censorship.
Adrian, as a final question I have to you there, I mean, just to revisit that tweet, I'm not too sure if we're able to bring it up to the screen for our viewers, but you're also involved in a tete-a-tete against Julius Malema. You even wrote a column going in depth about how you feel that it's maybe a little bit old and boring for him to call you racist. I mean, does it help, though, personalizing these arguments? Some may argue that you are taking it personal, he's taking it personal, and as such, we're not doing our job as journalists.
Well, I think you can't just sit back and be a victim and be in this abusive relationship with a political leader who abuse you on public platforms, but they privately try to sweet-talk you. I think those days are over, and I think we have to stand up against that. It's not a personal thing. It is actually in the public interest when Malema attacks journalists. Let me just end up by saying fact-checking is absolutely at the heart of this week. My publication, News 24, fact-checked the Pravin Gordhan charge sheet that the EFF handed to the SAPs and found that a lot of it was absolutely just made-up stuff. You know, there isn't bank accounts in Canada, doesn't look like what they purported to be. So I think that is the way forward. Obviously, a lot of pressure on our shrinking newsrooms, so we will have to fight very hard to get that going.
And the assertion by some media analysts that you revealed the source with that tweet, with that column, saying, Julius Malema used to call me with tip-offs when you were fighting Jacob Zuma. Some may say that you maybe acted untoward there. What's your response there, revealing a source on social media?
No, that's not true. We all speak to political leaders. My point was that Malema can't one day call me as an editor, and then me being white is not an issue, and the next day tweet that I'm a racist thing and that he refuses to meet SANEF because I, as a white person, will be part of the delegation. So it's really to expose the hypocrisy that Julius Malema exercises.
Thank you very much for your time there, Adrian Basson. Final word from you, Ferial. Is that journalists' jobs? If we're not revealing hypocrisy, if we're not illustrating the true character of individuals, are we failing?
I think that our duty right now is somewhat different. I think that we're being ushered into the post-truth era where disinformation is being sown for political ends, for the ends of corruption, to close off exposés of how money is flowing. And I think our job is to realize that we've joined the world. We've joined the US, we've joined Mexico, we've joined the Philippines, where leaders are trying to use the post-truth world to do, for me, anti-democratic things. And I feel it's our duty as journalists less to engage them in Twitter wars, but rather to expose that.
Farrell Haffajee, a senior columnist and reporter, joining us on the Politbureau. Just to remind you, the EFF were invited to this conversation. After showing some initial interest, they decided not to join it. It would have been a much more fulfilling one had they joined us on the Politbureau. But coming up next, we look at the DA's call to secure our borders. Is it borderline xenophobic?